Gareth noted the weapon inside the box as well as a few extra pencils. He also noticed a fair-sized circular piece of metal that glinted in the fluorescent light of the room. As he placed the art pad in the lockbox, his hand lingered near the curiosity.
What's this?
He picked it up and held it aloft. It had a considerable weight to it.
It's a challenge coin.
Coin? Like currency?
He'd read about ancient humans using metal discs as a form of tradable value signifier.
Not really. I guess you could say it holds some value with the influence it could pull. Really, it's just a mark of my membership in Cerberus. Everyone who serves is minted an identical coin.
So, it's like a trophy? Or a keepsake?
Yeah.
I see. Iconography of a three-headed dog, in reference to Cerberus. Namesake of the group. Makes sense.
He placed the coin back and closed the box. He had a moment of awkward fiddling trying to work the lock, but stopped when Penn motioned him not to worry about it.
Sorry, these aren't made for human locks, it seems.
He held up his hands.
You're good.
Well, you have fun tonight?
Yeah, actually, I did.
I can imagine it was nice to be back amongst your own.
I suppose, yeah, to be honest, after everything, I think I was just happy to loosen up. Feels like I haven't in a long while.
You certainly seem to strike a spark with that dancing man.
Ha, not likely. It was fun, sure, but I have a rule about V-necks that deep.
His clothing was taboo.
Not exactly, but it certainly said something specific if you catch my meaning.
Penn made a face Gareth really only understood from context clues.
I think I understand.
Maybe that's a little mean of me. Hey, whatever, we're leaving anyway.
Gareth chuckled. Happy Penn wasn't a fan of the man.
Speaking of leaving soon, I should probably look at the damage in my room. I've been putting it off. I just know it's going to be a complete mess.
I bet. Mine was too.
Was?
Gareth glanced sideways at the room.
I thought you hadn't started cleaning up yet.
All right, Shrimp, I was going to offer to help you out, but now I'm not so sure.
I retract my statement. Might need those arms.
All right, let's go, Shrimp.
Thank ya, giant.
Gareth shuffled over to the door. Penn followed him out and down the hall to his own room. There were indeed a few things Gareth would not have been able to set right, and although the job could easily have been finished in an hour or so, Gareth spent almost 2 making sure everything was spick and span. After a while, Penn just sat and watched as the man muttered to himself, making minute adjustments to the few personal adornments he kept in his room. A small group of townsfolk stood a ways from the nebula and said their goodbyes. The mayor waved to Dig as Penn jogged off the ship and over to the young woman who'd lent her the dress. It was washed and folded in Penn's hand. As she reached the girl, she held it out.
Sorry, almost stole your dress. Here.
You know, keep it.
She smiled and gently pushed the outstretched hand back.
Are you sure?
Absolutely. It might not be your normal.
She motioned to Penn's current military function clothing.
But it doesn't even fit me well, so go ahead.
All right. Thanks, I don't think I caught your name.
Meredith, and you're welcome.
She smiled brightly. Penn rejoined the Nebula crew and waved to everyone.
You know, Penn, I like this side of you guys. They're nice, still big, and rambunctious, but nice.
Deg said as she joined him.
I don't think I'd mind coming back here.
Agreed. I think our entrance could use some work. Plummeting is not my preferred method of descent.
The way he emphasized "my" clearly implied that it was Penelope's preferred method.
I was about to say mine either, but if you add up all the ways I've landed on a planet and how many times, I'm not sure the math would support me. Speaking of our landing, we need to toss.
As she tried to continue her sentence, the loud scream of a ship's thrusters could be heard approaching.
Ah, the tow ship.
Deg said, looking out over the trees. A few seconds and the ship could be spotted descending from the clouds. It took only a minute or so for the hulking barge to slide into place above the nebula. The townsfolk said their last few goodbyes before heading back towards town to keep out of the way. Still, even as they left, they could hear the thrum and clank of the tow ship lowering a number of arms. At the end of each was a maglock that magnetized to the outer hull of the nebula. 12 mechanical arms slowly lifted the nebula up into a ribcage-like bay in the belly of the ship. Yet more securing arms locked them in place, and even though it was assisted, finally the nebula was airborne again. It was ultimately a short ride to the city dry dock where repairs could be started. In half a day, the nebula was transferred, under her own power, to the planet's orbiting space station to undergo final repairs and checks. While Thwill insisted on his assistance and him be present during everything, the rest of the crew took some time to check out what a human-built and run space station might be like. The most obvious difference right off the bat was the size. Everything was clearly built for human proportions and no other. The crew were dwarfed not just by the station's occupants, but by its architecture. Beyond this, the crew noticed that most of these humans moved with an expediency that the townsfolk didn't. It seemed like everyone had a place to be, and they were intent on getting there without delay. As Penn led them to the station's main plaza, very few people who passed them even gave a cursory look, and the few that did were only curious of the rare alien visitors. Still, this curiosity didn't pull most away from their business. Dig called everyone together before they went their separate ways.
All right, guys. I know a few of you were curious about Terran-made tech, and you're free to explore as much as you'd like, but just be careful. Penn?
People here will probably be less friendly than the folks we just met, so keep that in mind. Spacer types tend to be abrasive even by our standards. That said, this isn't some backwater station. Security is everywhere, and their main goal is to keep the peace, so if someone starts getting rowdy, they'll intervene. Don't go anywhere that looks obviously shady, and maybe don't wander alone. You'll be fine.
Excellent. Keep comms on, and our departure time is in 3 hours. The ship is open, though, if you're done early.
With that, people started to break off towards various points of interest. Dig headed towards an antique shop. Tonnet found a medical facility to pester. Penn didn't need to explore, she knew precisely where she was going. As she split off, a voice caught her.
I'm not terribly interested in wandering, given the events of the last few days. Would you mind if I tagged along with you?
Gareth seemed a bit more pensive now that they weren't planet-side anymore.
I suppose. Keep up.
He trotted up next to her and kept pace as she picked her way through winding infrastructure and increasingly tight corridors. His mind shot back to the fighting ring in the lower decks of Kardec Station. Was she really going to engage in that sort of thing again? And this time it wouldn't be flimsy bots, but probably other fighters.
Penn, we're not headed to some backroom fighting pit, are we?
Ha! No, Gareth. There are MMA and other martial sports on the station, but they're on the main levels.
How silly of him, of course, they would be. He wondered where then they were headed. As they went, the station's architecture got progressively dingier. Lights blinked as they held on to life or were so long ignored that a thick layer of grime caused them to cast a noticeably dimmer light. If he had to guess, he'd say they were in some of the oldest sections of the station.
Didn't you say not to go to the shady parts of this place?
Technically, I said you guys shouldn't, but don't worry, we're headed to the right kind of shady.
She flashed him a grin. Was all he could muster.
Hey, you asked to tag along. But don't worry, I wouldn't take you somewhere where I couldn't protect you. In a lot of respects, this could be considered one of the safest places on the station.
Penn slowed her pace, and in a few more turns they came upon a slightly wider alleyway with very few other occupants. Most of them were clustered around a door which also held Penn's attention. Slate gray, heavy and solid metal. Above it hung a red neon sign that spelled out, "Lead's dead."